was a bitterly cold morning as crews started to take up their positions for the 8 a.m. start of the race. Someone with a long memory pointed out that by 8 a.m. in days gone by, racing would have already been underway for 2 hours. Drivers and co-drivers gather in little knots. Others chat to friends and family, and each competitor has his own way of dealing with the pre-start jitters.
A large crowd of off-road enthusiasts had braved the early morning chill to watch the start of what was going to be an interesting race. The Sun City 400 is a spectator-friendly event, with other fans already starting to gather at the numerous spectator points along the route. The Castrol Toyota Hilux of Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton was the first car flagged away, with other competitors starting according to the times they set up on the prologue. Cars no longer flagged away at 1 or 2 minute intervals known as dust gaps, and ABSA Off-Road Championship races are these days run on what is known as real time.
Into the right, into the left, right. So we can make a little bit, 10 seconds.
With no dust to worry about at the front of the field, Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton were in the pound seats. Castrol Toyota fans were hoping this would be the day they would break the Nissan monopoly, and with a 47-second leeway to make up, it was Hannes Grobler and Jean Moore in the first of the Donaldson Nissan Navaras who would have to force the pace.
Hein Lategan and Chris Birkin were third on the road in the second factory Castrol Toyota Hilux, but already there were indications that dust and early morning sunlight were making for tricky conditions. Behind the Toyota crew, former South African champions Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer were hoping to take advantage of an encouraging start position. The Ford crew desperately needed a good result to ease the pressure on the entire team in what is a performance-driven sport. The twin-turbo diesel Ford Rangers had shown glimpses of enormous potential, but what was now needed was a solid finish well up in the points. Early signs were encouraging.
The father and son pair of Hugo and Jaap de Bruin looked full of aggression in the Michelin XL Toyota Hilux and were being chased by Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau, who were the first car on the road among the Special Vehicle Brigade. The Total Porter team started 20 seconds behind the De Bruins and were keen to put another car between them and the chasing pack.
George and Sharon Barkhuizen started 2 seconds ahead of championship leaders Duncan Foss and Ralph Pitchford, and early on were managing to keep the Donaldson Nissan Navara pair at bay. Award-winning photography with a cell phone camera is hardly likely in dusty conditions, but enthusiasts will try anything. There was plenty of early action, with Gary Bertolt and Andre Vermeulen being chased by Cully and Quinton Solvalt, who were also desperate for a good result. Cars were coming thick and fast, with a good battle developing between Ivar Tollefson and Quinn Evans and Chris Visser with Japie Badenhorst, who'd made up time on the Nissan. Right behind them, Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzar were flying in the Century Racing CR1, and an interesting Ford tussle was also developing between privateers Kobus van Tonder and Rian Gopa in the factory turbo diesel entry in the hands of Thomas Rundle and Stavros Giannakis.
There was early drama at the front of the field, with Hein Lategan and Chris Bergen suddenly in the lead in the Castrol Toyota Hilux. Teammates Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton retired with a damaged steering after hitting a rock, and Hannes Grobler and Jean Moore strayed off the route and lost 7 minutes. Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer were elevated to second in the factory Ford Ranger, but were quickly relegated to third when Hugo and Jaap de Bruin went past them at a rapid rate of knots in the Michelin XL Toyota Hilux.
An early charge and the Taylor and Houghton retirement, as well as problems for Grobler and Moore, had taken Hugo and Jaap de Bruin from 5th at the start to 2nd, and 2 Toyota Hilux entries were running at the front of the field. Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer were looking comfortable and were given a big reception at a Ford VIP area at one of the prime spectator points.
At the front of the special vehicle field, Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau were also looking comfortable in the Total Porter. They'd started the day just over a half a minute ahead of reigning South African champions Cully and Quinton Solwald, and had maintained the gap between the 2 cars. Behind the Total Motorsport car, Duncan Foss and Ralph Pitchford had only passed 1 car, the Barkhuizen Toyota, but had gone from 7th at the start to 4th.
The unfortunate Hannes Schobler and Johan Moore lost their GPS system early in the race and wrong slots cost them time. They dropped back to 5th and were more than 4 minutes down on the leading car. The Donaldson Nissan crew were pushing hard to try and make up for lost time, but the route demanded a fair amount of caution with hidden dangers, known to competitors as lurkers, liable to extract a heavy toll. Bloemfontein-based George and Sharon Barkhuizen were having a steady run in the AIM Toyota Hilux, with George having the somewhat unusual distinction of having played underwater hockey for the Free State. Gary Berthold and Andre Vermeulen were also putting together a solid performance. And Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst in the RFS Toyota Hilux picked up a place when they got ahead of Nissan crew Ivar Tollefson and Quinn Evans.
On the special vehicle front, SA champions Cully and Quinton Sulwald were gradually losing ground to race leaders Shamir Bariawa and Siegfried Rousseau, who'd already worked themselves into a comfort zone. Chasing after the Sulwalds were Ivar Tollefson and Quinn Evans, who had Nick and Ryan Harper right on their tail. The Harpers had picked up a couple of places and were going well in the Atlas Copco Bat.
The little Ford cameo performance between a privateer crew and a factory crew was still in full swing. Kobus van Tonde and Rian Guapa in one of the ex-factory petrol Ford Rangers was still holding off Thomas Rundle and Stavros Giannakis in one of the new twin-turbo diesel Ford Rangers.
Off-road racers are not inclined to take prisoners, and the Keymax Bat in the hands of Jan Kraai and Tito Voigt was running second in Class P when the pair were muscled aside by Naeem Mossaji and Mohammed Moulston in the Tyrak Jimco. After their disappointing Prologue Championship leaders, Evan Hutchinson and Achim Bergman, were starting to work their way through the field.
When Hutchison and Bergman drove into view, Ernest Corbett and Warwick Goosen politely moved out of the way.
Next on the list were Terence Marsh and Peter Groenewald in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara. And Jan Kraai and Tito Voigt also gave Hutchinson and Bergman a wide berth, with the Motorite Revo 1 team now up to 5th among the special vehicles and hot on the heels of Naeem Mossaji and Mohammed Moulston.
After starting 3rd in the special vehicle category, Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzard lost ground in the Century Racing CR1 4x4. An early puncture took a lot of wind out of their sails, and they were now coming under attack from former pro cricketer Terence Marsh and Peter Groenewald in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara. Marsh and Groenewald are starting to get to grips with the Nissan after moving from the special vehicle category, where Marsh is a former South African champion himself.
Herman and Wichard Sulwald had picked up a number of places in the Sulwald Racing Zarco, with Terence Marsh and Peter Groenewald among their victims. There were some interesting little jewels starting to develop throughout the field, and Christian Ploy and Henk Janssen van Vieren were making good progress in the RFS Toyota Hilux. They moved ahead of Class P leaders John Weir-Smith and Richard Carolyn in the Men's Health Zarco, while Johan van Staden and James Rousseau were under attack from Atang Machagenene and Phil Arsenal. Veterans Ernest Corbett and Warwick Goosen were also making good progress in the Century Racing CR2 and were second in Class P.
Back in action after missing 2 races were Free State crew Peter Ruthven and Deval Boshoff in another ex-factory Ford Ranger. The crew are in their first season in the SP class, but were going well.
Bodo Berthold, winner of the first ever Sun City 400 in 1987, and Philip Herselman were running 3rd in Class P in the Atlas Copco Bat. Behind them, track and kart star Leroy Poulter and Rob Howie were leading Class P, with the Nissan pair moving ahead of the SP class entry of Graham Leith and Mike Lawrenson in yet another ex-Works Ford Ranger, now running in Transcore colours.
The closest battle of the race was in Class D, where reigning champions Henry and Maurice Matten in the MAN Repco Nissan Hardbody and Cliff Weichelt and Johan Smallberger in the diesel N1 4x4 Toyota Hilux started 2 seconds apart and were still locked in a furious battle. Simon Beckett and Tim Curtis were running at the front of Class B in the Century Racing Bat, and were at the front of a close fight between former Blue Bull scrum half Coetzee Labuschagne and Johan Gerber in the Raysonics Nissan Hardbody, and Perky Labuschagne and Rikus Fourie in the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux.
Cape crew Derek Dutoy and Ian Pienaar were chasing after Class B leaders Simon Beckett and Tim Curtis and had the bit between their teeth. The Orange Tree Bat was at the front of a gaggle of cars that included Glenn and Rob Gibson in the Gibson Racing Bat, Louw de Bruin and Rian Greyling in the Rurikon Ford Ranger, and reigning Class E champions Jannie Visser and Joks Leroux in the RFS Toyota Hilux. Also in the thick of this little fight were Dewald van Breda and Johan de Toy, who ran into a spot of bother and dropped a place to Dion Venter and Ian Palmer in the second 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux running in Class E.
Bringing up the rear in this bunch of cars were Heini Strumpfer and Henry Ohigu in the Micron Excel Toyota Hilux, and brothers-in-law Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson, who were on a charge after starting 48th on the road in the Regent Racing Bat. In the interim, the Gibson Racing Bat had run into a problem.
We got a problem with our clutch. It was fine when we started. It just seems to be taking at the top. We just don't want to burn it out, so we're just going to slacken off the adjuster here a bit, and then hopefully be on our merry way.
There'd been more drama at the front of the field, with Toyota crews of Hein Lateghan and Chris Bergen, Hicho and Jaap de Bruin, and Chris Visser and Japie Badenhorst joining the band of retirements. Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau were now first on the road and still leading the special vehicle category. From 7th at the start position, championship leaders Duncan Foss and Rolf Pitchford were now leading the production car field without having to overexert themselves by passing other cars. Gary Bertholdt and Andre Vermeulen had been elevated to second among the production vehicles, also without having to take any real risks. Although over 2.5 minutes behind the leaders, Cully and Quinton Sulwald were still in a solid second amongst the special vehicles.
Although overtaken by Foss and Pitchford and Bertholdt and Vermeulen, the husband and wife pair of George and Sharon Barkhuizen were having their best outing of the year in the AIM Toyota Hilux. They were starting to come under fire, though, from Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman, who had quietly worked their way through the field to start into third place overall among the special vehicles.
The highly experienced Neil Woolridge and Kenny Shortheimer were nearly 5 minutes behind Duncan Foss and Rolf Pitchford, but the twin-turbo diesel Ford Ranger was sounding healthy. One sensed that in their eagerness to get a good result, Woolridge and Shortheimer would be prepared to carry the Ford across the finish line.
Nick and Ryan Harper were once again going along steadily in the Atlas Copco Bat. The Harper method is a little more conservative than the flamboyant Naheem Musaji and Mohamed Maltson, but both teams were protecting 100% finish records this season.
Gradually working their way back up the pecking order were Hannes Krobler and John Moore, who is the current South African co-drivers champion. Krobler's name is synonymous with Nissan race, rally and off-road machinery. He's probably the most cheerful person in South African motor racing, and his exploits in the Toyota Desert Race have turned him into a national hero in Botswana. Krobler and Moore had moved into 5th in the production vehicle category after overtaking Terence Marsh and Peter Groenewald, who were having their best outing of the year in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara. Another crew with a reputation for grinding out consistent race results, Marsh and Groenewald, have found it tough going after switching from the special vehicles category, but they were now looking at a top 5 finish and a possible podium.
The battle between the privateer Unifreight Ford Ranger and the factory twin-turbo diesel was still in full swing, with Kobus van Tonde and Rian Guapa still holding off Thomas Rundle and Stavros Giannakis. Behind them, Ernest Corbett, who is in his mid-60s, and Warwick Goosen were into the Class P lead in the Century Racing CR2, with the Rurikon Racing Ford Ranger Peter Ruthven and Deval Boshoff still running strongly.
Former Class B champion Jan Kraai and Tito Voigt were now cast in the role of playing catch-up as they tried to regain the Class P lead. Not far behind the Kruijffurt car was a slightly battle-scarred and aerodynamically remodeled RFS Toyota Hilux of Christian de Ploy and Henk Janssen van Vieren, who were also gradually moving up the pecking order.
The Ferodo Nissan hardbody of Leroy Poulter and Rob Howie was out in front of Class E, with a pair ahead of Cliff Weichelt and Johan Smallberger, who were in charge of Class D, following the demise of the Zermatten brothers. Chasing after Weichelt and Smallberger and Poulter and Howie were Picky Lambeskaghni and Rikus Erasmus in the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux, with the pair pushing hard.
Lambeskaghni and Erasmus had already won twice this season in an impressive start in their national off-road career, but had the experienced Richard Schilling and Chris Davies right on their tail.
The Free State crew of Louw de Bruin and Rian Kralin were putting together their best performance of the season in the Rurocon Ford Ranger. Also having their best outing were Kutsia Lambeskaghni and Johan Gerber, who were trying to put an end to a horrific trot of 4 non-finishes in a row in the Racesonics Nissan hardbody. Brothers David and Gary White were running into a string of little problems in the Rurocon bat, but in the spirit of off-road racing were pressing on regardless, and also looking to end a lean streak were Potchefstroom-based crew Diebold van Breda and Johan de Toy.
After a nightmare prologue and with a standing co-driver, Don Thompson was trying to salvage something from the race. Behind the KwaZulu-Natalian, the orange tree bat crewed by Derek du Toit and Ian Pienaar had taken over the Class B lead, after Simon Beckett and Tim Curtis had rolled a now battered and bruised Century Racing bat.
A regional championship race was run in conjunction with the Sun City 400, with the win going to veteran former national champion Gil Nel and Sandra Lambeskaghni. Sandra is the daughter of Kutsia Lambeskaghni, who was competing in the national championship race.